president of the board of directors. And I'm happy to welcome you here virtually. I guess I think this time last year, a lot of people were still kind of getting accustomed to online meetings, and now we're all pretty expert at it, I imagine. So they tend to run, they lack the intimacy of an in-person meeting, but we'll still be able to get through our business and hopefully have some good discussion while we're all here together. So I guess the first item of business is to approve the agenda, which you should be able to see on your screen at the moment. So I would like to entertain a motion to approve the agenda. And
motion to approve.
I'm sorry.
Mike Chamberlain. Motion
Mike
to approve.
Chamberlain, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike. Do I have a seconder for that motion?
I will.
I'm guessing was that Ian?
That was me, yeah.
Oh, great. I recognized your voice. I didn't see anything, but I recognized your voice. Is there discussion of the motion? Would anyone like to amend or add anything to the agenda?
We have a couple of raised hands.
Okay.
One from Brad Nickerson and one from Andrew Holland.
Okay, that's great. Brad, did you want to have anything added?
No, my raised hand was to move or second the motion.
Oh, thank you, Brad. Okay, well, we've got that. We've got that covered. Thank you. And I don't see any hands up now. So the normal practice, at least in my circles, is to, in a forum where we can't really signify coherently an aye or nay, is anyone opposed to the motion to approve the agenda? Okay, then that item of business is carried. The minutes of the 2020 annual general meeting, those were circulated in the package of materials that you were sent when you registered with the NBEN for the meeting today. I guess I would invite people to take a quick look at the minutes to see if they are correct in your recollection from last year, exactly 1 year ago today. And if once people have had a chance to look, I would like someone to move to approve the minutes.
So moved, Brad Nickerson.
Thank you, Brad. Can I have a seconder for that motion?
I second.
Who, just for the minutes, who was that seconded?
Natalie.
Oh, Natalie. Thank you, Natalie. Discussion of the motion. Do the minutes seem correct? Did anyone want to suggest any required alterations? Okay. Hearing none, is there anyone who is opposed to the motion to approve the minutes? Okay, great. The motion is carried. Put that over there. The third item on our agenda is business arising from the minutes of the 2020 AGM. Did anyone want to ask any questions about business arising out of those, or does anyone have any business arising out of those minutes? Okay, well, we certainly have a question period at the later on in the agenda. So if something comes up, we can certainly address any questions that a member has. So moving on then briskly along, I am happy to present my president's report. So I'll wait for that to get queued up on the screen. So this is my latest president's report, and I'm happy to present it to us tonight. If I could have the next slide, please. So I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement that the land through which the Nashwaak flows and on which we gather today is the traditional unceded territory of the Wolastoqey or Maliseet people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which the Wolastoqey first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Wolastoqey title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm happy to introduce our hardworking members of our board of directors over the past year. So Stephanie Merrill continued to act in the role of vice president. Andrew Holland was our treasurer. Dorothy Diamond was our secretary. And Julia Carpenter, Jean-Guy Lehman, Melanie McCarthy, Brian Perry, Mike Chamberlain, and Ian Lodge. And we're very grateful for their hard work and service during the past year. And I'd note that two of those members, Melanie McCarthy and Brian Perry, who've both been members of the board for 2 full terms since 2017, are concluding, and we'll have a separate item in our agenda to recognize their accomplishments and their contributions to the organization. And I'd also like to acknowledge our equally hardworking NWAI staff. So Marika Chaplin, our executive director, Natalie DeSeta, who's our project coordinator, Lauren Murdoch, our conservation coordinator, Mariah Bellier, who's our restoration and outreach coordinator, along with Ian Smith, Kate Turner, Victoria Rugrock. And I'd also like to note that our longtime project coordinator, Gillian Hudgens, left the Nashwaak Association earlier this year to take up a position at the city of Fredericton. I don't know if Gillian is on the call at the moment, but we certainly hope that her new position is going well. And we actually expect to see quite a lot of her because we'll be interacting through the business of the organization quite a lot. Please don't forget that you can become a member tonight of the Nashwaak Watershed Association, or you can renew your membership. I just did it earlier in the call. I realized that I hadn't renewed yet. So it's quite easy. You can go onto our website. There's a pull down menu for membership, and you can click through and make a donation that will constitute your membership fee. And if you do that, then you will be eligible for drawing door prizes later on tonight. So please do log on and renew your membership or join for the first time. So, thanks. So I'd like to give a little overview of just some of the highlights of the association's work over the past year. So we're currently working on 16 funded projects from 7 different funders with a record-breaking total of more than $400,000. That represents an increase of 30% over last year. And actually, it's more than that because, of course, the hardworking staff members that I just told you about a few minutes ago who are on the call managed to bring in another 90 grand just earlier today. So I can't even keep on top of the projects that were getting funded. So we just received funding from Marika, I believe it was Eco Action today, news from them.
Yes.
Yes, that's great. So that's a multi-year funding project. So the multi-year funding, as Marika was explaining earlier, is extremely important for organizational stability because we can make longer range planning and we can do a more accurate budgeting for the organization. We assessed 30 culverts in 2021. We've been doing culvert assessment for a number of years, mostly to address issues of fish passage within the Nashwaak and its tributaries. So to date, we've assessed over 225 culverts. Many of them, I believe, it's pretty common for about 2/3 of them to represent barriers to fish passage. And so we document all of these culverts, and then we work with landowners and DTI to try to remediate culverts, especially if they're on streams and tributaries that are important for fish populations. And so we've installed a number of fish ladders and we've done culvert remediation in a number of sites. Water quality monitoring is an important part of the work of the organization, as it is for all watershed groups in the province. So we monitor water quality in 12 different sites throughout the length of the river, as long as about 37 temperature loggers. I believe that's the correct number. And we've been producing reports through the summer. I think we've produced reports that we've posted and through social media, reporting on water quality along the length of the Nashwaak, and it's been quite good. There were a couple of spots where E. coli was detected in a couple of locations, but overall, I believe the last water quality update was in September, and I think it was green dots all the way down the river, so that was really good news. We had a contract with the province to conduct river ice monitoring last winter and spring, and we expect to do the same this year. We've broken all of our existing records for tree planting this year, with 17,000 seedlings planted throughout the watershed, most concentrated on the Marysville Flats and the Niels Flats properties. And you can see here on my slide that although the majority of trees planted are silver maples, they're kind of our backbone tree for riparian restoration. We've also invested in some more endangered native species like bur oak and butternut, as well as Acadian forest species elsewhere in the watershed. And that would be part of the new work that we're starting on Acadian forest projects. Over 400 students have participated in our outdoor education programs this year, which is quite an accomplishment given the challenges of COVID, of course. We've retrofitted one existing fish passage location, and we've identified another site for which we're currently seeking funding. And we continue to study and promote habitat stewardship in a variety of locations. So those are the kind of higher level highlights of some of the work that we've been doing, and the staff have been very busy during the whole field season undertaking these projects, and they've got great support from some dedicated volunteers who've been coming out and getting involved with the work of the organization. Thanks. I'm happy to announce that we've completed our long-term restoration project on the Marysville Flats property. I say completed because we've achieved our longer-term planting goals and restoration goals. I'm sure we'll be continuing to work on that site for years to come to make sure that the trees are happy and healthy. We've worked for the better part of a decade on this property that's owned by the city of Fredericton. So if you're not familiar with where the Marysville Flats is, on this picture you see on the screen is looking downstream, and just off screen at the lower right would be getting up towards Bridge Street in Marysville. So we're looking downstream from, more or less, we're hovering over the drone was probably hovering over the cotton mill at this location, looking downstream. So we've worked on this project for a long time, especially over the past 6 years. Working on quite a lot when I first joined the organization, and I'm not old, but I have to say that when I first started working on that property, it was pretty much a cleared hayfield still. We had done some work, we'd made some modest plantings on the property, but it was mostly a cleared hayfield. And the transformation of the property is really remarkable. If you haven't been down to this site, you should take a walk with your dog and take it in. The areas immediately when you enter the site the trees are topping 20 feet. We're starting to get a real kind of understory. It's starting to look a bit like a forest. The trees further down the property are more recent, but everything is looking really healthy. It's really a remarkable transformation. And as a result, it's going to really benefit. This was a property, not only was it a cleared hayfield, but it was also subject to quite a lot of erosion. Water temperatures recorded in this stretch of the Nashwaak were among the highest anywhere along the river in the height of summer. And so once this property is fully restored as a floodplain forest, we can really expect it to improve this stretch of the river as a habitat, not only for fish, but for lots of animal species within this region of the watershed. And we have every expectation that this stretch of property is going to return to its natural state, which is a floodplain forest. And we're finalizing, I reported last year that we were still working on a conservation easement with the city of Fredericton. I think we've probably been reporting that for several years now, and we're really close to having it finalized. I think we're hoping to dot the final I's and cross the final T's later this year. And what that will provide is a a legal mechanism for us to steward this property into the future. If I could have the next slide, please. So earlier this fall, we also completed the work that we were doing, removing the Campbell Creek Dam. So we worked with our partners, who were the Maliseet Nation Conservation Council, the Atlantic Salmon Federation, St. Mary's First Nation, and the Wolastoqey Nation in New Brunswick, along with, of course, the landowners who are the city of Fredericton, to complete the removal of the dam. So the dam was quite a dilapidated structure. It was in quite poor condition, and removing this dam opens up 33 square kilometers of fish habitat for spawning and rearing. And it's also really noteworthy that this is the first major cold water tributary that flows into the Nashwaak as you proceed upstream. Hopeful that's going to be development for improving the prospects for fish populations within the watershed. And it's certainly an important, it was we do culvert assessment as a regular set of practices, and we have done for many years. And of course, something like the Campbell Creek Dam represents the uber dilapidated culvert that needed remediation. So we're really proud of the work we've done at this site. And it was a long-term project, and it was a project that involved major logistical challenges. And I think the staff have done a really excellent job in shepherding this one along. If I could have the next slide, please. So we're also continuing to work on the Sisson Mine file. And I reported last year that the government had just recently, at that point when we had our AGM last year, the government had fairly approved a 2-year extension on the EIA approval. So basically, originally, under the conditions of the EIA approval, the proponent had 5 years to complete all of their baseline work and to commence the mine construction. And that was supposed to be completed by December 2020. So we were watching very carefully and noting, of course, that there didn't seem to be much development at all. Certainly, there was no move to commence construction in the lead up. Citing challenges due to COVID, the proponent asked the minister for an extension, and the minister granted a 2-year extension with no public consultation, I'll note. We heard about it actually through a press release that the Northcliffe Resources put onto their website. So this prompted the New Brunswick Environmental Network as a letter to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Gary Crossman, which I am proud to say that I drafted, and then we worked it as a committee with a number of signatories and signatory groups. The letter expressed our concern over this decision and asking the minister to provide an update on all of the EIA conditions that had deadlines that had already passed at that point. Many of the EIA conditions of the Sisson Mine are tied to construction date. The majority of the conditions are tied to construction date, but many have earlier deadlines. So we listed almost a dozen deadlines that had some component that had already passed. The minister did respond to our letter. He indicated that we could obtain some of the information from the Department of Environment and Local Government, and that other information, specifically information pertaining to the financial security plan, had to be obtained through right to information. So Brian Perry and I drafted extended RTIPA request, which was submitted earlier this fall, and the relevant departments are currently working to fulfill that request. So we're hoping that that will provide us with an up-to-date source of information of how the proponent is proceeding in terms of meeting its EIA obligations. And we see that as our most important role at this stage of the process, is acting as a watchdog to ensure that all 40 EIA conditions are met completely and transparently, and also to develop strategies to implement if any of these conditions are waived at the minister's discretion. So that concludes my president's report. We've decided that what we should do is hold questions. If you have questions that you would like to ask, by all means, enter your questions into the chat. What we're going to do is we're going to have our financial report by Marie Chaplin. We're going to do our election of officers and our board of directors. And then under item 7, we've got other business and member comments and questions. And I think it'll be more efficient if that way you can type in questions from me based on my report. You can ask questions of Marika or anyone else, and we'll handle all of those questions during item 7. And then what we'll do is if we run out of time for questions, then we'll open up another question period after Cecelia Brooks's presentation to the organization. So if you have questions for me, by all means, please put them into the chat, and we've got our team are monitoring the chat, excuse me. And I'll turn it over to Marika for her financial report.
Great. Thank you very much, Peter. It's always a pleasure just seeing how involved you are with the work of the association, and it's wonderful. Normally, I at least am able to present you with a bottle of honey or something. So apologies for. Oh, you got at least had one slice of pizza that you shared with your sons. I don't have fancy slides because there are a lot of documents associated with my report, but I would ask if you could turn your attention to the financial statements for the Nashwaak Watershed Association. They were included in the package that Anika sent around, and obviously I could go into a great amount of detail, but I will try to keep it fairly brief. Certainly the Nashwaak Watershed Association is in a healthy financial position. If we take into account our bank balance and our retained earnings. This fiscal, we had, as Peter mentioned, support from 8, because it just went up today, 8 different funding sources spread across 17 projects. We are grateful to have the funding support from World Wildlife Fund Canada, the Canadian Nature Fund for Aquatic Species at Risk, the Atlantic Salmon Conservation Foundation, the New Brunswick Environmental Trust Fund, the New Brunswick Wildlife Trust Fund, the province of New Brunswick through a contract we have with them, SEED, Canada Summer Jobs, and Eco Action, which we just heard about today. Very exciting. Those are the funders that enable us to continue to work as we are a not-for-profit organization. And pretty well all the work that we do is through grant applications that we pitch to various funding agencies and hope to have some success with. Regarding memberships, as that's always an interesting topic, we had this past year a record number of memberships, largely due to the mail out that we sent in December of 2021. And actually, Tori has already prepared the mail out for this December, so that will be coming within a few weeks. And that resulted in the website resulted in over $2,000 in donations. Also, over the course of the year, we had donations made in the name of Matthew Wilson and Andy Waters. Regarding the financial statements, what page are we on there? You could go back one if you don't mind, Anika, just to I'm just going to get my hard copy out here. Yeah. Thank you. I think I need my special glasses for seeing the screen there. So the statement of financial position shows the assets and liabilities of the association at its business year end. So as you know, our fiscal year end starts 1st of March and ends at the end of 1st of April, ends at the end of March. And so because because our finances so we have an internal bookkeeping company, actually it's an accountant that does our finances, and then they get a second view with Teed Saunders Doyle. So we have a pretty comprehensive approach, and so we get these typically back in the summer. So just a few months ago, we received these documents, and so here we have the balance sheet. The accounts receivable are comprised of funding grants, primarily the Environmental Trust Fund and the Wildlife Trust Fund, that were in this March 31st, 2021 fiscal year, but they were received after the fiscal year end. So that's why they're tracked as receivable. That often happens because those funders typically require us to advance pay and then get reimbursed. And so there's frequently a lag period, particularly where project reports are being reviewed and the financials are being reviewed before payment is made. The accounts payable is comprised of regular bills outstanding at the year end. It also includes payroll deductions for March that were paid in April and accrual for the accountants. Very similar to last year. The overall accumulated surplus at the end of the year was over 86,000. And turning over to the next page, we have the income and retained earnings, or revenue and expenditures. So last fiscal, our revenue was up by over 114,000 over the previous fiscal. And our overall revenue increased from 247,000 to 339,000 plus a bit more coin. Most expense categories are consistent year over year. There were a few that were less consistent. These notable variances include the employment benefits. This category includes EI expense, CPP, and workers' health and safety. And the increases were due to Work Safe New Brunswick, I guess is the quicker way of saying that, and CPP. And for training, there was also a notable variance, and that had more to do with just what expenses got lumped into that category. And that category also included educational materials, primarily related to the upstream downstream program and some of our other outreach programs. The net income was 30,000. You can see that lower down on the sheet. And the retained earnings were over 86,000. These increases were due to increases in memberships and donations, some contracts and grants, and the COVID wage subsidy. And that summarizes the highlights for the financial statements. And I did circulate, Annika circulated the comparative income statement and the balance sheet. I don't think I will go over these at this point in time, but if you have reviewed them, and if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to address them just a little bit later on in the agenda. And that's it for my presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Marika. It's customary to ask for, to move and to second to accept the financial report. Would someone like to make that motion to accept the financial report as presented?
I will accept that, Peter. It's Ian.
Thank you, Ian. Could I have a seconder for that motion?
Hi, it's Mel. I'll second that.
Thank you, Mel. Discussion of the motion. We can take more detailed questions from Marika in the question period, but is there any discussion of the motion itself? Okay. All right, hearing none. Is there anyone, rather than asking all in favor, is there anyone opposed to passing the motion? Okay, thank you. That's carried. Thanks, Marika. The next item on our agenda is election of officers and board of directors. And so we'll turn over to Julia Carpenter to help shepherd us through this part of our AGM meeting.
Okay. So most of you who have been to AGMs before would recognize Mel as the person who usually does this, and she has very extensive knowledge on how this all works, and I'm just learning. So bear with me and feel free to correct me if I get anything wrong. I'll just start by saying we're not taking any nominations from the floor at this meeting, just due to the nature of this being an online Zoom AGM. Peter already touched on, you can see our list of midterm directors who will be continuing with their 2-year term. And end of term and not renewing is Mel McCarthy and Brian Perry. So I'm just going to take a minute to acknowledge their hard work over the last few years and to thank them for all their contributions. Both Brian and Mel have been serving as board members since 2017. And during that time, they've both made significant contributions to the organization. Brian started out as a tree planting volunteer with McGinnis Cooper and continued his involvement as a director. He's been instrumental in the development of our first ever strategic plan that runs from 2021 to 2030. He was a leader on the Sisson Mine File and volunteer on the Human Resources Committee of the NWAI. He's been successful in getting annual funding from McGinnis Cooper for various projects, such as the outdoor education program at Dunbar Falls. And he's always willing to provide his knowledgeable legal advice to numerous projects. And happily, he is going to continue volunteering on our HR committee, even though he'll be no longer serving as a board member. Mel was also instrumental in the development of the new strategic plan. She's been a leader in board governance and always provided positive support and encouragement to the staff. So thank you both. And I believe, I'm not sure, Marika, I saw in the agenda that you, yes, so here's a photo of the gifts that we're presenting to those board members.
That's much appreciated. Thank you very much, Julia, and to the others in the organization. It's been a pleasure.
So moving on to reoffering, Mike Chamberlain has been with the board for a 2-year term that just ended, and he has reoffered. And due to our constitution, we don't need a nomination or a second in order for him to continue on in that role. Andrew Holland was appointed as an ex officio member last year. So that means he was a new member of the organization, interested in getting involved with the board. So we appointed him as an ex officio member. So he's, in addition to serving on the board, he's also been acting as treasurer. So he is offering to become a full board member for the 2021-2023 term. So we will need a nomination to re-elect Andrew Holland.
This is Mel. I would be happy to nominate Andrew. His service in the past year has been exemplary, and his experience in the policy and governance and environmental sectors is super useful and exactly what the NWAI needs at this time. So his continued service would be a great asset to the organization.
Okay, thanks, Mel. Can I get someone to second that?
I can second that nomination, Peter Toner.
Okay. Excellent. We also have a nomination here for a member in good standing from Martha McClure. So I'm just gonna read a little blurb about some of Martha's background before we ask for a nomination. So Martha lives in Marysville. Her and her husband have donated and had membership with the association for a number of years, as well as contributing to volunteer activities. She has lots of experience in nonprofit such as Conservation Council, Harvest Share Co-op, New Brunswick Community Harvest Garden, Quakers, Envirothon and Science Fair, Parent School Committee, Fredericton Toy Library, She's a biology researcher and teacher with post-secondary degrees in biology, insect ecology, and education. And in her comments states, the river is local and personal for me and something about which I care deeply. I would like to contribute in a meaningful way. So if we could get a nomination for Martha McClure.
This is Mel again. Martha had volunteered, self-nominated. I'd be happy to either officially nominate her or second the nomination. I've known Martha for several years. She's one of the wisest souls that I know, in addition to the things that you've already shared about her. And she's a thoughtful soul with a big heart and incredible scientific knowledge, which is a rare combination.
So Peter, we may not need, since she's self-nominated, we might just need that second that Mel's already given.
Yes, I think that's correct according to the Constitution.
Okay, great. Welcome, Martha. And in addition to those, you'll see I have a list here of ex officio nominations. So these are people who have been involved with the Nashwaak Watershed in some volunteer capacity and are new members and are interested in serving on the board. So they have self-nominated as ex officio members. These nominations have been accepted by the nominating committee, and we're going to welcome them as ex officio members, which essentially means they can participate in board discussions and activities, but will not have voting rights. And then a year from now, after they've been a member in good standing, if they'd like to run for election as an officer, then they can do so at that time. So we have 3, and I'm just going to quickly go over those as well, just so everybody can get to know the 3 new ex officio members. So the first one is from Adam Birchweaver, who's from the Scotch Lake area. He's worked with the association on several occasions, particularly with the tree planting. He's worked in the NGO and ENGO sector for the past 10 years. And in his current role, he is involved in working in schools across the province to empower students to take climate action in their schools and communities. He has lots of experience with community engagement, climate education, agricultural, horticultural, and botanical knowledge, and a vast network within the education department and experience with grant writing and receiving government funding. Our second self-nomination is from Shaylin Wallace. Shaylin lives in Fredericton, and through her work with the Nature Trust of New Brunswick has been a partner with the Nashwaak Watershed Association with projects including restoration, education, and volunteer activities on nature preserves. And she was also contracted by the Watershed Association to help with Campbell Creek restoration projects, specifically with the wood turtle. Much of her community involvement has been through Nature Trust New Brunswick with stewarding nature and preserves in the area. She has a master's in science from UNB, which was focused on the management of wood turtles in the agricultural landscape, which is knowledge that can be very helpful and very specific to the Nashwaak watershed. She's currently the stewardship coordinator at Nature Trust New Brunswick and has a lot of experience with restoration work, coordinating events, and applying for funding and retaining volunteers. And last but not least, we have a self-nomination here from Parker Menzies. Parker also lives in Fredericton and has a passion for environmental and nature sustaining organization. He's an active volunteer with the Nature Trust of New Brunswick and often attends cleanup initiatives in the greater Fredericton area. He volunteers annually at the Ville Cooperative. He's a lawyer practicing in Fredericton with experience in construction and commercial law, but also has knowledge of environmental law theories and practices, and has also done pro bono work for habitat preservation societies. And he's also a registered professional engineer with the Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists in New Brunswick, and is looking to contribute more to the Nashwaak watershed. So with all that, we're looking forward to the next couple of years continuing on with a very diverse board with lots of different skills to contribute behind the scenes to support the staff.
That's great, Julia. Thank you very much for that. If we could just return to Julia's slide for a second, I think we should formalize the proposed board of directors for the next year with a motion to approve this slate of candidates for the 2021-2022 year until our next AGM. Could I have a motion to approve this slate of candidates?
Brian Perry, on motion.
Thank you, Brian. Could I have a seconder for that motion?
This is Mel speaking. I'll second it. Oh,
Sorry, did I hear?
Mike Chamberlain?
Was that Mike Chamberlain?
Yes.
Thank you, Mike. Discussion of the motion? Okay. Hearing none, I would like to, rather than ask for all in favor, could I ask anyone opposed to the motion, please indicate so? Okay, thank you. The motion is carried.
I just realized I did forget to mention that Peter and Marika will probably be setting up some kind of orientation in December for new board members, as well as the new Exofficio board members.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, thank you, Julia, for handling that. That was actually, it's a really important part of, it's a constitutionally mandated part of our annual general meeting. And it's, it seems, you know, it's a list of people's names on the screen, but there's a lot of work that actually goes into arriving at this moment. So we're really pleased to have a diverse group to work with for the next year. That's great. So that takes us to item 7 of the agenda, which is other business and member comments or questions. So this would be where we would invite anyone in attendance at the meeting tonight to address a question to any of us, any of the staff or any of the board. I think maybe it would be worth having the our staff members introduce themselves if they would, because some of the questions might be directed to them. So we have already met Marika Chaplin, our executive director. Do we want the other staff members to just say a quick hello on screen?
Sure, I guess I can go first. My name is Natalie DeSeta. I'm the project coordinator for the Nashwaak Watershed Association.
Hi, I'm Kate Turner. I'm the forest project coordinator.
Hi, I'm Lauren Murdoch. I'm new. I'm the new conservation coordinator.
Hi, I'm Mariah. I'm the new restoration and outreach coordinator.
And I'm Tori. I'm the restoration and outreach technician.
Great. Well, thank you for introducing yourselves. And I'd like to just open the floor to any questions from the membership on anything I may have covered in my report, anything Marika covered in her report, or any of the work of the organization over the past year. We're all here at your disposal.
And while you're coming up with just the right question, Ian Smith sends his regrets. He's unable to participate as he's house sitting at a very remote location outside Dawson City, way up north.
Wow.
Gary Spencer here. I read in the newsletter there were 15 smolt captured in the downstream migration this year. Is that correct? 15?
Yes. Is that in the article by Charisse McWilliams, Gary?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So that's like so incredibly important that I won't even start to talk about it. What was the cause? Is there a temperature, a timing? Why so few? We would get 15 an hour just a decade ago.
Yeah, well, I'm sure other people could add to what I'm going to say, but I know for a starting point, there were some concerns about the timing of the smolt wheels, and the water temperature levels rose very quickly. I think there were also some concerns about the placement of the smolt wheel.
You got church pool, right? Like it always was?
Yes. And in all honesty, those decisions aren't made by our association. They are made by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and the Aboriginal Fisheries Strategy crew. Those are the two main ones that I recall being of concern.
Is there any way is there a report, or is there some sort of data set that I could look at? It's extremely disturbing.
I think the best person to contact would be Charisse. The DFO does prepare an annual report because the Nashwaak is an index river, but I don't think that's available yet. We haven't seen it.
Watershed be reviewing the report, or you want me to get it on my own?
Typically, they don't ask for our review, as it is their scientific work. But we can certainly inquire and get back to you, Gary.
Appreciate that. On the Sisson Mine file, could we share the correspondence that the Watershed has been having? There are other partners who've worked hard over the years in collaboration. We weren't aware of the correspondence that's going on. Could we get copies of that?
Yeah, we can certainly do that. That was a letter that was coordinated by the New Brunswick Environmental Network, and we can certainly provide you with a copy of that letter and the minister's response. And at the moment, as I said in my report, we're in the data gathering phase of trying to obtain information from the Department of Environment, local government, principally, and we'll have to see what comes in as a result of that request under our TIPA, and then we'll be in a better position to assess where things are. But yeah, I can certainly share with you that correspondence. It was signed by, I don't know if Annika knows right off the top how many people signed. It was around about, I think, 20 to 30 signatories on that letter. So
I can't confirm. Sorry, it's not my file at the NVN.
okay, yep.
Is that Lee? No.
What's that?
I thought that might be Lee commenting. She's
no. I know Lee's on the call. I won't.
Here.
Yeah, I see that Lee's on the call. I wouldn't want Lee to put Lee
Thanks, Peter.
on the spot.
No worries. Thanks, Peter. I can't recall how many, but there was certainly a great number of people that signed the letter. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do we have other questions for anyone? Just scanning for hands up, but you needn't look for your hand button. You can simply just pipe in if you have something you'd like to ask. Well, we can certainly keep pondering any questions that you might have. We can certainly open the floor for questions again later in the program. But hearing none at this point, I suppose we're running a little bit early, but that probably isn't a bad thing. I believe Cecelia is on the call at the moment, I hope. Yes, I see that she's on the call. So the next item on our agenda is a presentation by Cecelia Brooks on the Indigenous perspective towards underground habitat restoration. And I'd like to ask Marika if you would like to introduce Cecelia to the meeting.
Yes, I would. Thank you, Peter.
Oh, sorry, before we do that, why don't we do the raffle later? Let's do the raffle after. Is that okay? I know I skipped something there. Shall we do that after Cecilia's presentation? Yeah, okay, sorry. Please go ahead, Marika.
Yes, we're delighted to have Cecelia as our guest speaker this evening. She is the water grandmother at the Canadian Rivers Institute at the University of New Brunswick. Cecelia is a grandmother of Wolastoqey, Mi'kmaq, Mohawk, and Korean ancestry, who is a member of St. Mary's community in Fredericton and lives in Nashwaak Bridge. She specializes in traditional plant knowledge and will be speaking about the Indigenous perspective towards on-the-ground habitat restoration. Without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Cecelia and welcome you to our annual meeting.
Hi, and I have a request because I'm actually doing this on my phone. The presentation, I was hoping somebody could screen share. There we go. There we go. Excellent. Thank you so much. Just wanted to say hello and come and talk. Marika asked if I could come and talk about an Indigenous perspective and in restoration, and I thought it was really important because I don't know the level of knowledge that people have about the Wabanagi people here, so I thought it'd be really important to go over some of the definitions and some of our ways of thinking, and also to define things like Eduoptimum, which is the Two-Eyed Scene concept, as well as even Indigenous knowledge, because some people don't quite know what that is. And there's probably as many definitions out there as there are people who talk about it. And so if you could forward the slide twice. Oh, well, I guess we could look at the objectives if you wanted a quick look. And then the next slide. So two basic things I think that are really, probably simplifying things a bit. But when you talk about the Wabanagi culture here, two things that you can remember is that everything is alive, and that not only animals, but everything, and that we're all related. And I'm sure, if not all of you, most of you have heard this from the Indigenous people here. And those are two things that are really important, because I think that knowing that changes the way that we deal with the environment. Next slide, please. And then a really important guiding principle in the Wabanagi, I guess our Indigenous laws, is the guiding principle of Nedugalimp. And Nedugalimp is, it really means making sure that you're avoiding not having enough. And sometimes that can also be translated to say, don't take more than you need. And then, of course, recently with everybody reading Braiding Sweetgrass, we talk about the honorable harvest and looking at the world more as a gift economy versus the monetary economy that we live in. And I put a little resource here by Cinema Politica. There's a really nice little short film with Carrie Prosper, who talks about this concept of avoiding scarcity, Nedugalimp. Next slide. So I just wanted to include this slide because it's really, if you look at it, it's really kind of neat if you think about the fact that this was the map that we created at Mi'kmaq de Bluda'an when the Trans-Canada Pipeline project was being proposed. And so we did an Indigenous knowledge study looking at the ecological knowledge within the communities. And this is just the Mi'kmaq communities. This is not including the Maliseet communities. And if you look at this map, you can barely see New Brunswick. And also keep in mind too that this is not even all of the population of Mi'kmaq living in New Brunswick. This is representing the knowledge of 74 participants. So it gives you a pretty good idea of the ecological knowledge that is embedded within the communities. Next slide, please. So Eduoptimum. I don't know how many, I can't see you, so I hope that some of you have heard of it. The Two-Eyed Scene concept, it was, the terminology was coined by two elders from Eskazoni. Albert Marshall's name is on here, but his wife as well, who has passed, she passed 3-4 years ago, Merdina, and they came up with this concept of looking at the natural world, not by looking at it with just Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous eyes, but also to look at the world through the scientific or Western science perspective. And that's really important for them there in Cape Breton, because they were getting ready to start a program in this integrative science program at CBU. And so this idea of not just looking at the world through one lens, but looking at the world through at least two perspectives. Next slide. And this is just a little quick diagram. You guys probably all remember this from, I don't know, probably grade 5 or grade 6 science class. You know, the scientific methodology of, you know, making the observation, asking the question, forming a hypothesis, conducting experiments, and then, you know, either accepting or rejecting. And if you'll go to the next slide, you'll see that the IK methodology is pretty much the same. I think when you talk about a people who've been here on the land since time immemorial, and we say that, but there are some archaeological records showing, I think the oldest record is the site in Marysville, and that's 13,500 years. So that's quite some time. And you know, I know some people still hang on to that Bering Strait theory, but not true, can't be. We've been here a bit too long to have come across the Bering Strait. So the next slide is a definition of Indigenous knowledge that I've put together just to kind of explain what it is. I mean, what is it that we're talking about? I mean, it's, you know, as Indigenous knowledge could be called, you know, all the knowledge that Indigenous people have, and how is it transmitted? How is it shared? How is it recorded? And as many of you would know, we had no written language until, in I guess, the last few years, the last 10 years. We now have a dictionary in the Wolastoqey language. Now the Mi'kmaq did have hieroglyphs, but that's not, that's actually pretty recent, I think. It's not, you know, 10,000 years old or anything like that. But the knowledge was, is always held within the communities and held by the people there, by what we call knowledge holders. Sometimes it's elders. But really and truly, everybody has some knowledge within our communities. And if you look at our songs, our dances, you know, if you've been to a powwow, it's very entertaining, yes, but a lot of those dances have, they have meaning. There's knowledge that is meant to be passed along or shared in some way through those dances and the songs as well. Sometimes we forget too that when we're dancing, we're not just dancing. It's not like Western dancing when you go out, and I think dancing in the Western world and some other cultures a lot of times is a mating ritual, I believe, or it seems so anyway. It can be, and but the dancing that you see at the powwows really is it's a way of transmitting and remembering also some of the stories and things that the knowledge that's held within the communities. So you see this at the bottom, Mtsit Nohma, that's Mi'kmaq, and that is the phrase "all my relations," and so we say those words to signify that what we're speaking is true. Somebody got okay. So next slide. Just to give you an example of the indigenous knowledge that is within our communities is that if you look at, let's just look at this slide here, 1753, that was James Lind, and he was a royal surgeon in the Navy, and in the Royal Navy, and he published a paper showing that citrus fruits would prevent or cure scurvy. Just remember that date, 1753. Next slide. So this here is when Jacques Cartier arrived here on our shores. His crew was quite sick with scurvy. So that was about a little over 200 years prior to James Lind's publication. And in Jacques Cartier's journal, he documents the scurvy affecting the crew and how so many had passed away from the scurvy. And so when they arrived here, they were quite sick, and the indigenous people gave them some kind of evergreen tea. And this paper here in the Journal of Ethnobiology and Ethnobotany kind of tries to dissect which tree they're trying to figure out which one. I thought maybe Arbor Vitae, the cedar, because that is the old Latin binomial for it, could be. But honestly, it could be any of them. It could have been a combination of all of them as well, because they all are very high in vitamin C. So this knowledge was there, and what I find really interesting and is that, you know, here it is 1536, and without laboratories or, you know, any kind of testing, just by observation, the people here were able to diagnose and treat the scurvy that the Jacques Cartier's crew was having issues with. And on to the next tree. It's the next slide here. That illustration was actually made by Sue Blair at UNB, and the photograph of that man is Gabe Paul from Kingsclear. And I show you this slide because he had told the Wolastoqey creation story many years ago. I guess it was the turn of the century, about 1905 or 6 or something like that. And they had documented it, and you can actually find it online if you want to read the whole kind of traditionally told version of it. But I want to share my version, which is very, very short compared to his version, because I want to talk a little bit about the significance of this story. So the story, as many of them go, they start with, a long, long time ago, there was no water in this region. And so people were dying from thirst. And they had sent out messengers in all 4 directions and runners, I guess, not necessarily messengers, but they were looking for water. And the one that had gone north found a big giant monster frog sitting about where Grand Falls is right now. And he came back and reported that the frog had all the water and was not willing to release it. And so the people said, well, this is quite a desperate situation. We should call Glooskap. We need to call Glooskap. So Glooskap is our superhero. And so they called Glooskap. Glooskap showed up and was told what was going on. And so he walked up to where Grand Falls is now, found the big giant monster frog, and he said, you need to let go of the water. And the frog, of course, again said, no, I'm not letting go of anything. And so Glooskap said, I don't have time for this nonsense. And he looked around and he found the biggest tree he could find. And he pulled his axe out and chop, 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 chop. He chopped the tree down. Tree came down, hit the frog in the head. Frog released the water, and the Wolastoqey was formed. So this story, the first time I told this story in public, next slide, please. I was at the Canadian Rivers Institute Science Directors meeting, and they were that year working on the State of the Environment report for the Wolastoqey. And so I thought it was appropriate to tell the creation story. When I got done, the director at the time was Alan Curry. And Alan said to me, he said, there's a paper I'm going to send to you because I think you'll find it very interesting. And this is the paper he sent me. So it was about, he was trying to find out where and how the freshwater fishes came to this region. And so he used his Sable Isotopes in Nature lab at CRI to find that there was a debris dam that was holding back all the water in the world. Somewhere between 11 and 18,000 years ago, that debris dam began to deteriorate. And guess where that debris dam was? Yeah, Grand Falls. And so Alan, he said, wow, he said, that would have been really helpful if I had met you prior to that. And if I would have had that information, it certainly would have saved me a lot of time. And so now Alan he's called me a few times when he's been going to a meeting and I couldn't be there. And he tells the story too about the creation story and how it lines up with his research. And what's really neat is that if you think about just the idea that here you have, I know, because some people would say, so what, big deal, right? And I've actually heard that, so what, big deal. And the big deal to me is that, and I think it would be for you as well, is that here you have science and you have Indigenous knowledge saying the same thing. Now, granted, our story was a bit more colorful. We have these giant monster frogs, and if you read the whole story, you'll see that there's much more to the story, but just interesting that now you have science corroborating with the Indigenous knowledge. And that was all done without having been written down over somewhere between 11 and 18,000 years. Next slide. So about a year, I guess it would have been a year after that, I work with Michelle Gray and Andrew Nicholas and Luke DeMarche. And we did some research to analyzed some of the sites where the muskrat root was being harvested. And what triggered this research was that the elders, they were concerned. They said that some of them, there was a couple of them who said that the muskrat root that they were getting from Mars Hill it tasted funny. It didn't taste quite right. And they were also concerned that there would be some environmental contaminants in the medicines because we use the root of the plant. And so Michelle did a lit review, and she was also the toxicologist for the research. And I think it was 2015 or 16, it did finally get published. Next slide. And here you will see the whole list of the analyses that were done. So we were primarily looking at, the metals, the pesticide and herbicide residues, and this was because the elders were concerned with the contamination. Next slide. So if you look at and compare the Acorus calamus on the left side, Acorus americanus on the right side, you can see that the calamus on the left side, the seed pods are quite, well, there are no seeds there. They're not mature fruits. They're not viable. And the Acorus americanus on the right, you can see the seed pods, they're quite full and viable. And if you look at it, the next slide, you can see that, again, there's a slight difference. You see the undulations in the leaves on the left side, and you can also see that the mid vein on the calamus is slightly off center. I have to admit the picture on the right isn't as clear, and I'm going to have to get a more clear picture next year. But you can see that the mid vein, and there's no undulations in the leaf structure of the americanus. Next slide. If you look at this, you can see that, well, this is what's really cool, is that if we're looking through both our eyes, and you have scientists and you have the elders and the indigenous knowledge holders working together, it was the elders who alerted the scientists, saying, well, we're concerned about contamination. But through that, we found a couple of things. One was that there were 2 species of Acorus in New Brunswick. We thought there was just one, but there were 2, and we found that. The second thing was that we found that the Acorus americanus did not have high levels of beta-acerone, which is a procarcinogen, but the one that came from Europe, the Acorus calamus, did. And the zinc levels in all the samples, had very high zinc levels. And I thought that was interesting because we use the muskrat root as an immune system booster during cold and flu season. And then it reminded me of when the zinc lozenges first came out. I think it must have been in the early 80s. And now I think you can still buy them at the pharmacy to kind of shorten the length of your cold. And so I thought, well, that's kind of neat, because our ancestors were using the root, and I wondered if the zinc had something to do with it. So yeah, through this process of looking at the situation through both eyes, we both learned, and it's something that Albert Marshall calls the concept of co-learning, that we have to co-learn together if we're going to make the environment that we're in a better place. That it's a good idea to look at the world through both the scientific ways of knowing. Next slide, please. So this is the quote that you see there, Wedgescaliadi Akepmi Denimej Dan Wedebek Soltig. here's an example of passing on knowledge, sharing, transmission of knowledge through song. Those of you who've heard the Mi'kmaq honor song, that is the second part of that phrase, "Get me dan emanage, don wedabek sultig," is the first words of that song. And you know, that whole phrase is something that you will hear people say, is that we sprouted from this land and that we must respect our ancestral roots. And that, I mean, it has deep meaning for the Indigenous people here, because we feel compelled to be stewards of the land, and that we have a responsibility. I know you hear a lot of folks talk about we have rights, but really and truly we have responsibilities. And it's the plants and the animals, they have rights. And so these sacred responsibilities is for us as the Wabanagi people to take care of the lands and of the waters of Wabanagi. Next slide, please. This here, I think, is, I mean, if I had to talk to you about anything at all, I would just talk to you about this one slide. So I think it's really important for all of us to understand what the intent of the treaties were and what the treaty relationship is, or should be, could be. and it comes from these two words. I was fortunate this summer to, I was in the presence of Albert Marshall and Ron Trombley at the same time, both of them who speak their respective languages fluently. And I already knew the word on the right, Angugamgewel. It's Mi'kmaq, and I knew that meant I knew that meant adding to our kinship relationships in Mi'kmaq. And so I had a feeling that, and that's the word that we use for treaty, because treaty is an English word, right? Treaty is, and when we think of treaty in the English word, I think most of us envision this kind of like a big piece of paper with this, you know, contract and then signatures on the bottom. And if you can imagine, you know, 1700, the Wabanagi people had entered into treaties, Ankukamgewel, with other Indigenous groups. So it was nothing new in terms of, you know, coming to agreements with other people, but it was a new way because now we had paper and this language was written out. And in our ancestral ways, it would have been done on wampum, where the beads would have been arranged to create patterns that had meaning. And those wampum agreements are equivalent to the European treaty agreement. And so this word on the left is the Wolastoqey equivalent of Angugamgewel, is Laguduwagan. Laguduwagan means the same thing. It means adding to our kinship relations so that we can take care of each other and our mother, the earth, together. So you talk about getting lost in translation, because, well, the British, you know, they thought they had a contract, and they did, absolutely, but they didn't quite understand what we wanted. And so, and what our understanding of it was, that we were to all become, we were entering into a kinship relationship. So when we talk about this truth and reconciliation, and I know a lot of folks say, well, Justin Trudeau hasn't done squat, he's not doing anything, and nothing's happening. And the truth be told, it's really, yes, he needs to do something. But I think that what's really important is that we need to reconcile that treaty relationship. And that starts with us, the people, you know, not the government, but it starts with us. And so I think it's really important that as people on the ground, grassroots people, that that we work together as treaty partners. And I hope that in some way we can work together to look at the ecological restoration and how our ancestors would restore areas. And just to give you an idea of how it was done, it was always about mimicking nature. You know, when you're going to restore, let's say, an old agricultural field, I mean, we all know that old agricultural fields are kind of a new thing, but if you would have to think about what does the plant need first, right? And how can we replicate nature rather than just going out and planting a bunch of trees and hoping that they come back. I think we have to think about how does it happen in nature and how can we mimic that in nature? So I hope that was not too boring for you to listen to a bunch of words that you didn't know. And next slide is the thank you slide. So, and I guess I can take some questions if anybody has any.